1, 2, 3. Okay.
Hey, everyone.
Let's go back. And we're on. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having us in beautiful Salt Lake City, beautiful mountains. It's amazing outside. It's great to be here and actually kick off front today. So what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, I'm Tom Krcha, and I am a product manager at Adobe. Been there almost 9 years now. Worked as a designer, developer, and right now I'm sort of kibitzing into product.
I'm Alex. I'm a designer at Adobe. I was actually originally hired at Adobe to design future products or future tools and prototype them. But now I found myself on a team that actually builds tools for prototypes. So it's kind of a nice little switch around.
So today, we're going to take a little look behind the scenes of how we are baking Adobe XD, how we're building sort of seed teams to make ideas happen. We'll talk about the principles of Adobe XD, and we'll show you some examples of where we apply these principles in production. So a lot of the work I have done in my life has been inspired by this quote by Albert Einstein: if an idea does not sound absurd, then there is no hope for it. And in a way, that's the story of Adobe XD. You know, like, you really have to think sort of a little bit differently and crazy about how you approach things, and then just like pitch it and see what gets out of it. So a couple years back, my mom sent me a folder of old images from when we were kids. And now don't laugh, but this is me and my brother in front of an old PC. And actually, if you look closer on that computer, you can see there is Photoshop 5 running. And I stumbled on this. I was like, wow, I had no idea. So this is what I grew up on this pristine meadow in the background. And of course, Photoshop running on my computer. And you know, I was fascinated by what you can do with Photoshop. But even more, I was fascinated by how is Photoshop actually built? How are all apps on that system actually built? How the buttons work, how the panels work, who put it together, and how could it even work, you know? Like, I had no idea. So I started studying software engineering and started building apps when I was like 14, 15, and eventually got to Adobe. But today, we basically have a bunch of different products. This is how they evolved. And the question now is, if you were given a quest to extend this family, how would you approach it? How would you go about it? How would you dream about it? And what if you could completely start from scratch? So that was the question that we gave ourselves. And we started completely from scratch. Blank page, very simple, but we still wanted to capture the identity of Adobe apps. So we had a toolbar on the side, we had a document you work on, and we had a panel. And this was the first mock of Adobe XD, as you guys know it. Eventually, we built a prototype. And we actually started testing this prototype with users. It looks nothing like XD today, but it gave us a lot of answers. So people started using that. They gave us a ton of interaction and behavioral feedback on things, and they told us which tools they like, which they think we can leave out, and so on. There are actually some tools in this prototype that we haven't even shipped yet because we were like, OK, we're just going to cut it now and move on with other things. And this is XD today. You can see the identity is still captured there. It's very simple. And this is how it looks like with the content. A lot of the stuff that actually inspired this process has been inspired by design thinking, where you first put yourself into the shoes of a designer or your user. And for us, the designer, then you refine a problem, you ideate a solution, you prototype a solution, and then you test the solution. And if you look at it last circle, it's actually pretty much what XD is all about. So for those of you who don't know it, XD is a tool that allows you to design, prototype, and share your prototypes with other people and get feedback on that. But I don't want to talk about the XD, the product, but how it's built. So how do we basically build all of these things? So in the beginning, I was working with the Behance team, and I was a designer. And I was also coding partially and kind of like doing everything. And I saw that our process in terms of like communicating ideas wasn't perfect. And there was a missing tool because we were using a bunch of different tools. And in reality, I just put together probably the worst slide deck ever in my life, and I sent it around to directors, VPs, and I was waiting for response. Like sometimes we keep overthinking things, and we keep waiting for our ideas to be fully collected before we hand them over. But the reality is, the ideas are just lying on the ground, and you should just pick one up and run with it, send it over, get feedback, see what other people think, and get going. Sharing thoughts is key. Because in reality, people can keep talking about things, but until someone actually does something it's non-existent. So later on, one of the directors replied, and we formed a seed team. And our seed team was very simple. We had a designer, talent, PM, that was me, and 2 engineers, NJ and Enerd. And we started thinking about what we should do collectively together. And usually you have these usual suspects in the production. You have a designer, you have some engineering involved, you have a product manager, and they all wear different hats, but have different deliverables. What sometimes happens is that all of them live in their own silos, and the problem with that is that somehow, somewhere, there might be an expectation that product manager sort of like gathers the requirements, hands them over to designer does the visual design, the behavior, and so on, and then hands it over to engineering. Engineering executes on that, and we're done, right? Not really. Because I really believe that if there is a certain healthy conflict in between of all of these elements, you can actually come up with incredible things. And I feel like design should be almost involved in a little bit of engineering, be able to tell them, hey, you know what? It's not about like how things look, but how they also feel. And if you are building an app, and the app, for instance, doesn't perform well, and the designer tells, yeah, engineering, they couldn't build it, I mean, hold them responsible for that. Make sure that the app feels, scrolls great, zooms in and zooms out really fluidly. Like, hold them responsible for that, because you're responsible for that whole experience. And the same thing is like, hey, product managers, like bring engineering to user research. Have them part of meetings and discussions you have with your users. Make sure that they really build empathy towards the problem they're about to solve. And the reason for that is that you as a product manager also saves you some time, because you don't have to second-hand the findings to these people. You can sort of just summarize it for them later on, so you orchestrate things around research. And I really believe that that conflict can actually result in new inspirations, new angles that maybe other people on the team have overlooked, and could sort of like spark a little bit of genius. I also want to talk about resilience. So when we started working on things, I felt like there was no cookbook on how to like do things this way, because every single time you're starting over, you have a unique problem, you have a unique set of people you work with, and I really feel like it doesn't matter what process you've mastered in the past, you can almost start over. And the best skill to sort of master, I feel like, and this is just my personal take on that, is to master resilience, flexibility around readjusting the process, being very open-minded and welcoming to accept the changes and accept the process evolution. And keep basically evaluating the efficiency over and over and see if the process that you have currently implemented still works. And if it doesn't, cut it, rethink it, start over. Because maybe your team is growing, maybe you're pivoting to something else, maybe you have some user feedback that you have to implement, and so on. So when we started working on XD, the seed team, we put down these questions, and we tried to answer them. There were questions like, what is our mission? What are we actually doing? Who is it for? What is the value to users? What are problems we're solving for users? And also, what is it that we're not initially focused on? And I think this one is important, because sometimes, as you guys know, you pitch something, and then people start adding things on top of that, and you might not necessarily agree with that. So just try to guardrail your thoughts by saying what it is, but also what it isn't, and what it should not be or become. And we all went out and sort of captured our thoughts, and like we were supposed to come back with a one-pager. Obviously, one-pager always sort of spills into two-pagers. Everybody has tons of ideas, and we came back, we captured all of these ideas together, and we were like, okay, I think we've got it. The problem is, it's really hard to communicate to other people. How can we communicate a one-pager or two-pager to a team of people? So we distilled down a set of principles that would basically guard a vision. Why are principles important? They help you scale your vision. As you grow, you start to get more people. More people means more cooks in the kitchen, of course. And you want to make sure that as your team grows, as new people come into the game, you still look at the original ideas you had and make sure that you sort of follow them. And also, anybody on the team from anywhere, really, can always look at them and point at things like, hey, you guys, we're breaking a principle number one here. What should we do about that? And either you're like, okay, well, we all agree on that this is what we should do, or we fix that. So let's get a little bit more concrete. What are the principles of Adobe XD? So the first one is lightweight and approachable. The second one is about removing friction everywhere. And the third one is about being transparent, open, working with community, and so on. So I want to talk about the first one, lightweight and approachable. So I really like this quote from Scott Belsky. He says, users flock to simple products. Now, product managers, they tend to add new features, of course. Product evolves and suddenly takes users for granted. And what happens next is that users flock to simple products again. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So to achieve that, we kind of ask a different question, and it's more, how do you disappear? When a designer goes into our apps, they're looking to do a task, and they want to go into our app and then get that task done. So we don't want them to worry about the UI, nor should they, because it's just a tool. It's like an ends to the means. So let's break this down a little bit. To achieve disappearing, you look at consistency and simplicity. And it's like, cool, yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks for showing this slide. What does that mean? Thanks for putting text on a gradient and showing us this. But what it really comes down to is breaking down both simplicity with consistency. When I am in one app, I want to go to another app, and I want to be able to expect the same behavior and not have to get hung up on learning it or looking for something as I go along. So how do you create that consistency? Another pretty common question. I guess it's how do we create consistency? And I think the most important part of that is having a foundation. And we have a great team at Adobe that works on something called Adobe Spectrum, and this is our design language. So what you're looking at right now is just a few of the icons. At Adobe, we have thousands of icons. If you think about it, Photoshop alone has at least 1,000 or over 1,000, and that's just one product. So their task is actually to make sure that we have consistency across all our platforms now and going forward, and that's a huge task at hand. And this is just a small element of UI. And this is sort of a building block for me. These are like Legos for us as designers that we can pull from all of these things that the Spectrum team actually works on, and we don't have to worry about creating them ourselves. Another element of it is how type works. We want to make sure type works across all of our systems. So whether that's in our products, on mobile, on web, we know what to do when we need a headline, if we need a body copy. And this is vetted as well for accessibility, so legibility and things that are important. Again, this is stuff I don't have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. I can just pull from this system and build off of it. And they do a great job with just the finesse of it all. Just the small things like components, like checkboxes. There's this little nice animation that happens on hover, on click. It's just highly vetted, and it has tons of finesse. And I, again, don't have to worry about this as a designer. And they're really good at keeping simple and flexible design systems. This is a line with a circle on it. And it's elegant, it's nice, and it can work in any system that I come up with in our products. But these components are only part of the story. So if you look at some of our current products, we need to do a better job with consistency, but not a the biggest part of that isn't the components of it. It's actually the real estate. If you look at these, they have a similar vibe as far as real estate goes, but this is the default. Like when you have a new panel and you start making new workspaces, I can go from one document to another in the same app and it looks different, and that's kind of an issue. So if you look at our new generation of products, so this is Felix, this is Nimbus, and then of course we have XD, you can start to see that they have this very consistent vibe to them. And when I say that, I'm talking about the real estate. So you can look on the right side of any of these apps, and you'll see that we have this context panel. So it's our PI, our properties inspector, and it's contextual. It's based on what you're interacting with at the time. And on the left side, we have the toolbar, which is pretty consistent across most Adobe apps now. And then up top, we have the title bar. And this is where you can switch modes. So in XD's case, you have prototype and you have design. And you can also share things and manage links and collaborators in it. So why do you have to build this frame to be so consistent? Part of that was what I said before about going from one app to another. You want to have the user know what to expect. But it all boils down to the user can now focus on the canvas. They can get down to designing. And that's kind of our goal at the end of it. So consistency is the main point of this. And then there's simplicity. And I think to achieve simplicity, having an opinion is a really important thing. And oftentimes we don't have that strong opinion in our apps. So if you look at XD, we actually don't have a preference panel. So we make sure we have good defaults. If you have a preference, it's probably because your product's a little too complex, or a bunch of product managers couldn't decide on a default, and they put it into a panel. It comes down to good defaults encourage good design.
So let's talk about principle number 2, zero friction. So we really looked at all sorts of different perspectives on how we can remove friction. And UI is one of them, but the second one is something very important. But the question is, how do you kill a games experience? I used to work on games, and I can tell you that the easiest way to kill the games experience is to screw up performance. So if a game doesn't run 60 FPS at least, users disengage. So we think that the same thing applies to design tools or to any kind of apps, really. So when we started working on our first core for rendering, we wanted to make sure that we can render hundreds of these lions, because we knew that eventually people will have hundreds of screens. All these screens will be connected. There will be tons of content and photos on top of them, and you will want to zoom in and zoom out really fast. And this was my job for quite some time. I was just like zooming in and out all the time. And I still do that sometimes, just to double check if it's still there. And I realized that this is the key, like pretty much like the performance should feel invisible to the user. When users don't talk about the performance, you know that you did something either really good or really bad. So hopefully it means that this was good. So performance should feel invisible to the user. And the second thing here is about taking what's appropriate and leaving the rest out.
So in design school, one of my professors actually taught us a really kind of good metaphor when we were doing logo designs, and I think it translates really well to UI design, and that's take what you have and put it on the top of a hill, and then just give it a shove, and then watch it fall down, and whatever falls off is probably not important and not needed.
An example of that could be a distance decoration and how we approached it in XD. So you have two objects. When they snap to each other, we show a snap line. And we also wanted to show a distance between them so you can easily measure how far they are from each other. And the obvious solution here would be to just put a measurement sort of line in between them and stick a label on top of that. And we looked at it and we were like, but you know what? Imagine that you have 10 other objects that just got aligned, and they all have these distances and all sorts of things. And suddenly, you feel like everything would be very overwhelming. So what we did instead is, what if we could actually combine things together? And this is where we actually landed. We combined the snap line together with the distance decoration into one single line, so to, again, become invisible, get out of users' space, get out of the focus. Third principle is about being transparent and open. And how do we make decisions? So, of course, we do some user testing. We also have user voice website where we gather a lot of valuable content from the community. There are some business needs as well. There's some roundtables that we organize. We travel to different cities around the world and talk to people. We also get a ton of feedback from social. Now, by the way, if you actually build a tool that can capture and put all of these channels into perspective so you can make an easy decision just by looking at some chart, you'll be a millionaire. I can guarantee you that. So this is a business idea right here. I would totally use that tool immediately. So that's the hardest part. How do you actually make a decision out of all of these things? Because how do you put a weight on a specific channel, right? So let's look at a little bit in detail on how do we do these things. So like I said, we have our own expertise, but it also comes with bias. So we're trying to just eat our own dog food, and we actually design XD inside of XD. Now, Alex can probably tell you how that works.
Yeah, it's great because you click on the palette, the color palette, but it's like the UI inside the UI, and then I have to kind of like look over my shoulder, make sure nobody saw me do that. It's fun.
So the second thing is community. And we're actually trying to answer every single tweet that people tweet about Adobe XD. So if you guys tweet about XD right now, I'm pretty sure that very soon somebody from the team, not just from the social team, but either from the engineering, PMs, or designers, will try to answer to you. So we're trying to make sure that everybody from the team is involved in just like gathering the feedback and being on top of things. Roundtables, like I mentioned, I think this is from Hamburg. So we go around the cities and we just like sit down with users and we talk about their workflows, how they use specific tools, what do they like, what do they don't like, what do they want, what is a problem in their workflow, and so on. And this is another example of that. And sometimes we actually give them these $100 tests where we do these printouts, we send it to them, and we basically ask them, hey, can you put like dollar amounts on these features? And then we go around the table and everybody has a discussion about why they put this money on this specific feature and so on. Another channel is user voice. So this is where we capture bugs and feature requests. So for instance, like this request on the layers panel, which we'll talk about in a bit. So anybody can post an idea or comment on an existing idea or vote on a feature, and at that point, you're getting tons and tons of feedback on how, on what the community thinks about specific things.
So now that we've talked to the users and we're getting feedback on what they're looking for in the product, we have to step into the world of testing and validating these things. So first example of this is last year at Max, we announced visual versioning for our XD product. So we got user feedback that this is something that would be incredibly useful, and the first thing you do is you sketch it out. So we designed a quick sketch of it, and then we want to test this out, but we also want to get a feel for it. A static image of it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So oftentimes that means engineer or myself will build a quick prototype and just see how it feels and when it does things and how it moves, and then that's going to open up a ton more questions that we have to answer. And that's just the kind of first step a lot of times. The next step is actually getting a concrete flow down and actually putting it in front of users. And I really like using paper prototyping for this tool because it kind of keeps me honest as a designer. I can put something, I printed something out ahead of time, I put it in front of the users, and I can't say, oh, they would get this if I just made this tweak. I have to commit to this change. I can't make any changes to it. So every person I show this to, it's a consistent flow. So I really do like paper prototyping before we actually show them in-app experiences. But I know what you're all thinking. Like we on the Adobe design team, we're designers. We're our own users. Like we should know what we want in a product. And I think we agree. Like we're always right about things. So that's when our users asked us, "When are you going to add layers?" Our reaction was, "Why? Like why do we need layers? I use XD every day, and I never use layers. When I use Photoshop, sure, I use layers. There's a ton of merit there. There's like layer styles, there's nesting that has to happen. But when I'm in Illustrator, I don't use it. It's just kind of off to the side. It's something I forget about unless I need to like do something like unlock something, I'm not really thinking about layers or managing them. And After Effects, of course, you need layers for timeline management and all of that. So our first task was kind of, let's look at like how we use it as designers. So we open up one of our files, and it's just kind of, we don't take the time to manage a lot of these things. So for us internally, it's not that useful. Unless we're trying to hand this off to somebody, we'll kind of retroactively start managing it. So maybe it was just us. And so we asked people that were requesting this feature that might manage their layers a little bit better to send us some of their files. And this was one of them that we got, and it's not much better. We're still not convinced that they're using it in a completely meaningful way. And then what do I even say about this? Like, what do you do in this situation? It's just, it gets so complicated so quickly. And remember, let's take a look back. Like, this was our initial sketch. We wanted this incredibly fundamental new paradigm in software. So how do we bring something so complex into this system? I mean, it's just a zoomed, this is something we really just need to address. So we have to ask ourselves, what do people actually use layers for, and really break it down? Do layers really warrant this much complexity? So we kind of listed it all out. And it adds up pretty quickly. There's a lot of things that people are using layers for. And then we got a lot of this information out of our user tests and a bunch of that feedback. And spoilers, we have layers inside of XD. And I think we can talk about that.
So, but instead of just taking things that existed historically here and sticking them into your product, we really wanted to take a different perspective here. And that's the difference between just like linear evolution, where you take something that's existing, you take it, drop it in, done. Versus lateral evolution, where you sort of like take a side step, you look at things from a different angle, and you question them. So we had this question: what if layers were actually smarter? What if we could design layers panel for the current age? And we came up with this quick concept that we put in front of the users to get some answers, and we called it local layers. And the way it worked. Is it blank? No. OK, now. The way it worked was that you basically selected an object. And based on the selection, it would show you basically the layers that somehow relate to that object. Because oftentimes, you don't need to see 10,000 layers that you have in your document. You just want to work with the layers in the context where you currently are. And that could be a selection. That could be the current artboard, that could be the current group, and so on. You want to focus. You want to just glimpse over the layers panel and see the objects that you really care about. Now the question is, how do we find which objects you care about? And that's a bigger discussion. But
So we played around with this idea. We got it in front of users, and we decided that it needed a little bit more kind of foundation to it. So let me show you the compromise we came up with inside of XD. So if you look at this now, you have all of these artboards scattered all over the screen. And our layers, they actually just show you the different artboards on the screen. And then when I actually select an element on an artboard, it'll actually drill into that subset of artboards and just show me the thing that I'm working on. It's very contextual and just showing me what I want in the moment. And then if I drill into another layer of it, it actually will just start opening up folders. And it becomes pretty predictable in what to expect when you're starting to use layers inside XD.
Several things I like especially about this is that if you have two artboards that kind of look the same way, so you have like the background in the back, that background always shows down as like the last layer or like one of the last layers, and you can sort of expect it there. So there is like this moment of expectation and predictability. And also, I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but that folder is a little bit highlighted. So if you just like glimpse with your eye towards the layers panel, you can see that you can immediately orient yourself in the panel. And we also, if you have a long list of layers, we actually zoom, we scroll right into the center of that panel for you. So now the question is, how do we take a prototype and sort of build a factory to execute on that. So this is where we work with Alex. This is Adobe San Francisco. It is actually an actual factory. It used to be a hardware tools factory. Now it's software tools factory. But I want to talk about software triangle, iron triangle software development. You have 3 elements there: quality, time, and scope. And in reality, you can't have all 3 of them. It's impossible. If you're lucky, you can get 2 of them, and most likely, you're going to end up with just 1 of them. And you know that. You know, like as product managers, we usually come and we ask for this. Engineering team comes back, and they're like, we can do this. In reality, you get this. So that's just how it works. That's the world. So we have chosen quality over scope and decided to run with it. And the reason for that is that it's actually much easier to have a discussion about missing features or opportunities for you to grow versus broken or buggy product. That never goes well. So I want to show you 2 charts. This is a common beta. This is when somebody says beta, what it means. You know, like people immediately imagine like a full features, but really low quality, and it's like, oh, it's beta, so I can expect crashes. The problem with this is that you have this feature raise in the beginning. You're trying to satisfy users, and this is a model that could totally work for someone. Doesn't work for us, but basically you have this feature raise in the beginning, trying to satisfy users. The problem is you're leaving behind the quality, and then you release a product. Everybody's like, OK, this is amazing. Now we want more. And you're like, well, you know what? That was actually a prototype that we just released. Let us rebuild that again. And half a year later, we will have something more. So instead of that, we decided to release every single month and bring in features over time with the 1.0 quality bar, even though we put a label beta on the product. And this gave us several things. First of all, we actually can have a dialogue with users about features. You know, people can question them. They can start using the product right away. But long term, you're not sacrificing the quality and the trust in the product. The second thing I want to talk about here is excellence over shortcuts. So whenever, and this actually comes back to the discussion of like product design and engineering. So sometimes you design something, you hand it over to engineering, and engineering would be like, OK, we can use this technology for that. And they're like, is it going to work? Is it really going to be that fast? Is it going to be prime? Is it going to be excellent? And sometimes maybe not. You know. So instead of just like taking shortcuts to get somewhere fast, really think about what is the actual proper solution, because in the long run, it will be really good for you. So to sum it up, these are like 5 of the points that we would like you guys to leave with. The first one is principles will help you scale your vision from small team to a bigger team. Try to become invisible so users can actually focus on the content they work with. Be consistent but resilient. Treat quality over scope, and strive for excellence over shortcuts. And I want to finish with one quote, food for thought. When I'm working on a problem, I never think about beauty. I think only how to solve the problem. But when I have finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it's wrong. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Wrap up.